Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Our guest today is Lisa Giruzzi from Transformational Conversations. She was with us once before and I'm really happy to have her back.
It's nice to be back. Thank
Lisa,
you.
The last time you were here we were talking about social capital.
That's right.
We haven't strayed too far, but I thought of you when I came across this book called Creating We. And it was because later in the book there was something about conversations and the importance, and I thought, wow, this looks good. I think I want to talk about it, and Lisa would be a great person. And then I call you up and you say, what? I know that author.
Yes, I know Judith quite well, and I'm actually a co-founder of the Creating We Institute, so it was quite serendipitous that you called me and asked me to speak on this book.
The whole thing was, and this book was donated to the library. I'd never seen it before. I saw it on a table and grabbed it, and I thought, that's a great concept.
It's a great book. It's one of those books that when I first read it, I kept going, yeah, that's right, as I was reading it.
It's the best kind.
Yeah, it's a really good book.
So we can't really just spend 30 minutes reviewing a book that nobody's going to understand why we're saying what we're saying about it. So I think what we want to do is talk about the concepts in it.
Sure.
And we recommend it, but what are the basic ideas? What does that mean, creating we?
Well, the basic idea behind Creating We is that the traditional approach to organizations, whether it's a business or a nonprofit organization of some kind, or an association even, is that there is a one right way to do it. That generally there's a leader at the top who is directing how everything is going to go.
My way or the highway.
Yeah, exactly. And that I-centric approach, which is the opposite of we-centric, is the traditional approach, and it's one that has been handed down throughout time and is the fundamental way that business is done, is that there are leaders and there are followers, and never never they'll meet, or never they shall meet, or whatever the phrase is. And this kind of approach is, according to Creating We, and my beliefs as well, is that it is antithetical to human beings. That human beings are naturally connected, that we function best when we see ourselves as part of a whole, that when we can form complementary relationships with people who have opposite strengths from us, that those are the conditions that we work best under, and that the traditional approach actually suppresses the creativity and the enthusiasm and the natural desire to contribute of human beings. So Creating We is about causing an environment. It's not just about taking this action or that action, but literally changing the environment of business and organizations to be this we-centric approach.
Yeah, it strikes me, I always want to look and say, well, does that have to be true? And is it always true? And yeah, I do agree, but I was thinking of two examples that kind of demonstrate that in an interesting way. Ford Motor Company would be maybe something that somebody would say, yeah, well, the assembly line. And my grandmother spent 12 hours a day hammering nails into shoe heels. And Ford people in the beginning were just putting little bolts together. But now Toyota has turned everything upside down, and they're winning.
And the thing is it's not that I guess it's not so much that one is right and one is wrong. It's just that they produce different results. I think that the marketplace requires something different now. You can't just expect people to come in and make widgets and be happy. I mean, if that's some people, that's their talent to do that kind of work, and that's fine. But there's also a demand for innovation and creativity, and that kind of environment doesn't allow that.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it's a problem when you have somebody who thinks of a great new way to do something when they're on an assembly line, because it throws off the entire line.
And they're challenging the boss, and they're challenging
Exactly, and that challenging is not seen as a good thing.
Right.
It's seen as a negative thing. And
Right.
so that kind of environment, that I-centric, you're in it, you're doing your piece and the person next to you doing their piece, and again, that they're not connected, that causes many times assembly lines and things like that to break down. So it's the degree to which
Or when they don't break down, they keep doing the wrong thing over and over.
Exactly, exactly. And so the whole approach of creating we, or the whole concept of creating we, is to examine and inquire into, why is your organization doing the things that it's doing? What's the thinking that's behind the action? Because one of the fundamental beliefs in my company, Transformational Conversations, is that it's thinking that causes action, or sometimes lack of thinking, but it's the way in which we think, or the beliefs that we hold, that shapes the actions that we take. So this I-centric philosophy has given us all of the different practices that we take in the business world. And for most part, they go unexamined. And recently I heard a story, it's not a business story, but it's a funny little story of a woman who was cooking a ham. And she cut the ends of the ham off. And her husband said to her, "Why do you do that?" And she said, "That's the way my mother made ham." So that night the mother was coming over, and so the husband said, "Can you tell me why, why do you cut the ends of the ham off?" And she said, "Well, that's the way my mother taught me how to make ham." So they called the grandmother up, and she said, "Well, my pan was too small, and so I had to cut the ends off," which, that's a funny story, but it demonstrates how things happen. We do it this way because, and then even though that circumstances no longer exist, we keep doing it that way.
Right.
And one example in the workplace is that when workers first came from the farms into factories and things like that, they were highly uneducated. And so the supervisors were educated people for the most part, and they were actually held above. They had
There's a class here.
not only that, but they actually stood on a higher plane, like a stage almost, a platform, if you will, to watch the uneducated workers.
Lower masses.
Exactly, and check and see. And no worker could make a decision about something. They always had to go to the supervisor. Well, if you look at this hierarchical approach to organizations, it comes from that perspective, where here we have a very educated workforce for the most part, and we're still having these supervisors making decisions, even though the people who are at the front line are quite capable of doing so. So there's all these kinds of ways of thinking that aren't examined. And I think in this book, she talks about different ways of changing that from that I-centric approach to a we-centric approach.
So then the general central idea is fairly simple and pretty easy to accept.
Yes.
Maybe not completely easy for everyone to internalize and change. And that's the part that is the most interesting part of the book. Once you get past the title and you say, yeah, we can think about what's best for the company and not just what's best for the boss or what's best for one person.
Well, it's actually what's best for everyone. It's not just the company, but what's best for the employees. Like, everybody has a stake in it. And so it's not the company at the expense of the employee, or good for the employee at the expense of the company. It's actually a more symbiotic relationship where both organizations or entities succeeding or having a great experience.
So it's a deeper we than just
Absolutely.
we as far as the bottom line goes.
Much deeper, much deeper. It's about creating an environment in which human beings thrive instead of survive, or an environment where human beings develop and gain some mastery over their skills or feel like they're contributing, because human beings do that. We like to be engaged in something. We like to see that what we do is making a difference, and whether it's making widgets or teaching kids or any number of professions that people are engaged in, they're doing it for an end of, I made a difference today, or something I did mattered. And I think that the creating we approach allows people to experience that on a daily basis.
One of the things that struck me, and I think as you read through it, people have to see themselves and see situations that they've been in. And it's so natural that if you try to say something and somebody else isn't listening, and you're a sensitive person, well, you're going to stop trying.
Yes, absolutely. And not only will you stop trying, but you'll go talk to other people and try to find people who agree with your point of view. It's a natural thing for human beings to share their experience. So I may be shut down from you as my supervisor, but then I go talk to my friend Joe and say,
Boy, what a bad...
that was a really bad experience. And he said, oh, you know what, the other day she did that same thing to so-and-so, and now I got a conspiracy going. And,
Right.
you know, before you know it, now we know the problem in the organization is that particular supervisor or that particular employee. That's another...
The official problem.
Exactly. Well, that's the another outcome or a result of the I-centric approach is if we're not all in it together, then we're all in it more for ourselves, and then who's to blame is a very common conversation.
But it's never me.
Or if it is you, it's, I'm not going to let anybody know it's me.
Right.
You
That's
know?
what I meant.
Yeah, exactly. And even for people who are very responsible and are willing to take on that it was them, maybe, you know, somebody has that attribute, it's not acknowledged that, wow, thank you for, you know, being that way. It's, oh, well, now we know who to get rid of, and now that, you know, a new problem or another problem solved. Right. So I think the I-centric traditional approach produces results that are opposite of what we want, but where we are trained to look is for these individual people are in fact the problem. You know, Gallup did a pretty extensive study a number of years ago, and they keep doing it, and they keep coming up with similar results, and that is that over 70% of the U.S. workforce is disengaged from their work. I mean, when you think of that, only 30% of the workforce is engaged. That is not an individual phenomenon.
Yeah. So we're using 20% of our brain, we're using 30% of our manpower. We're really not clicking on all of our cylinders.
Yeah, and the thing is that this approach, this I-centric approach, I say is the source of that, and I think Judith would agree with me. Right. The we-centric approach gives you a different experience because people want to be engaged. It's a natural desire to be engaged when you're felt like you're part of something, when you're acknowledged and accepted, when you have the freedom to speak up, when you have the freedom to dissent. All those kinds of things allow you to be who you are, to give the best of yourself. And you don't have to hide that which you're not, and you don't have to pretend. And that environment is very exciting for people to be a part of. It's like, you know, you ever put on a nice comfortable pair of shoes or, you know, your sweatpants after a long day and you're like, oh, that feels so good. That's what people report when they're a part of these organizations. It's like
feels better.
It feels better. And when people feel better, as we know from all kinds of studies, they operate better. They produce more results. They're more able to help other people.
Less stressed?
Absolutely. Less health issues, I'm sorry, you know, because all the things that stress causes, you know, with the health issues and the lost work or what's known as presenteeism. Have you heard this phrase?
That's a new one.
Presenteeism is basically people who are there in body only.
I was going to guess that after a little thought.
Yeah. So those are again, negative results from the design of the current way that we operate in business and in most organizations.
And another thing, just to maybe wrap up, or maybe we could do one or two more symptoms, because I think it's good to look at symptoms of the problem so that you really realize you need a solution. Mm-hmm. And groupthink has always been a problem, where you have a group of people and they're going to agree, but they don't agree for the right reason. They agree because they're supposed to agree, or because the power person in the room or the most popular person in the room says it. And what's the point of carrying on, because how could we ever decide anyway?
Right.
It's you against me, so it might as well be you.
And I think what you're talking about is so prevalent, but people don't even have the space to acknowledge that that's what's happening. You know, that feeling of having to fit in, so you're not going to be the one to dissent. And because these practices that we have are so connected to these really ingrained ways of thinking, people don't call them into question. You know, meetings that people go to that they know are not productive, or doesn't matter what they say anyway, but nobody calls them into question, or the people who do aren't the people who can do anything about it.
Or as you said, they complain about all the meetings, but not at the meeting.
That's right. Right. Or for me, complaining demonstrates a commitment. You know, when you have employees that are complaining, I say that's a demonstration of a commitment. for a lot of employers or supervisors, what they see that is as a problem, that they have people who are complaining. But I say it's a demonstration of something. What's more dangerous is the resigned folks who don't even open their mouths. That's far more dangerous. And in Gallup, in the Gallup study, they call those cave dwellers, that they're consistently against virtually everything, CAVE, and that those are the ones that basically go underground, and that they're tearing down anything you're building up because they've given up on their commitment, they've given up on their feelings of that they can make a difference, so now they're just waiting for retirement or waiting for something else to come along. And we all have that experience, and it's easy to point our fingers and say, oh, they're the problem. But those folks didn't start out that way. Chances are they were very enthusiastic, very interested in change, and over time, because of the design of business, that's the result.
Right.
You know?
So now I guess we recognize it's better to have people tell you the truth. It's better to get real feedback, not necessarily positive feedback from the point of view of what you want to hear, but feedback that explains what's going on and gives you new ideas and creativity. What do you do even after you recognize that maybe you're part of the problem, but there is a problem? Do you need a consultant? Are there things you can do? Or even if you have one, what kind of things are going to be used to start to approach the problem?
Well, you know, you asked a lot of questions there. You know, I think sometimes, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a consultant, but I think sometimes having an objective eye is critical. You know, when it's the water you're swimming in, it's difficult to see what are the things that aren't working, or what are the things that are working, because I don't think we spend enough time focusing on that. And that's the bulk of my work is on that, is what is working and how can we do more of that.
I want to go into that more later.
Okay, but I think the other piece is that there are structures in every organization that need to be examined. And I don't just mean meetings, I mean things like, you know, your personnel structures, who reports to who and why, and all of those kinds of things as to who do they benefit. Are they benefiting the customer or the client? Are they benefiting your HR department? I mean, who is the benefit of that? And then when you figure that out, you can say, well, is that consistent with who we say we are? If we say we're a client-centered organization, for example, and all of our structures and practices are not client,
right.
Or controlling the staff, or we say we want, that's one of my favorite examples. I worked with a company, and the owner kept saying, I want the employees to act like they're owners. I want them to, look with the same kind of perception that I do, to see when something's off and take action, and, all these great, want them to be accountable. And I was like, this is great. Okay, let's work together. Well, he had to first start giving up all the control, because if you want 20 owners in your organization, you can't be
can't have a super owner and have it mean anything.
Yeah, you can't be micromanaging everything. You can't be making decisions for people, telling everybody what to do. You have to allow for discovery to occur. Just changing that one way of thinking that he had, which wasn't easy. I'm not saying it was like magical.
Right. Well, that's the trick here.
But his awareness of it, and then his willingness to say, okay, where are the places that this way of thinking manifests? And when we started to see that, and then we started to talk to the staff about what would they like to see different, it was this amazing process where all of a sudden, magically, teams started to show up, and accountability started to show up, and they started to offer suggestions, and some of which he took, some of which he didn't. But the bottom line is that it started with his belief system of, this is how you do it. You do it my way or the highway, but I want you to be accountable.
Right. Yeah.
No sense. Why would they be accountable? They learned how to engage in that environment.
There's a nice little part in this book that talks about the contradictions that exist in an organization, and that is one, and it's a reality, so that we can't say that the guy is completely wrong. They could make a mistake, and maybe they don't have as big a vision as he does. But what's worse, and that's kind of the way when they started talking about the problem, they ended up saying, well, actually, it's going to cost us less to trust people.
That's right. That's right. Another company I worked with, they decided that they were going to have decisions be made by the person closest to the task, which was revolutionary. So they didn't have to go into a committee meeting or a supervisory meeting, but they could, at the moment of the problem or the issue coming up, they were empowered to make that decision. I've seen other companies where they give their employees these 5, for the week, these 5 incentives that they can give to any customer they come in contact with. And they can be anything from something free to a certain percentage off. And it gave the employees this sense of, oh, when I want to acknowledge a customer, or I really want to thank somebody, I can do that. And it was amazing. It was great for business, but it was awesome for morale. So these different ways of thinking, these revolutionary, if you will, opportunities to give people who are working in the organization power. That's another concept of in creating we. It's called power with versus power over. And that is a concept that I think as time has come.
We'll push that a little further. Go with those words a little bit.
Well, power over is the traditional model of, supervisory or owner or CEO or whoever has the power over people. There's usually a degree of fear involved, or threat of some kind. In other words, you don't do it my way. There's the highway.
Or even just browbeating is no fun.
Yeah,
either.
and how many people have a terrible experience at work, but because they can't afford to not work, or they feel that they again can't say anything, that they have to put up with that kind of abuse. And that's what power over tends to look like. And there are, there's a spectrum here. There's the horrible boss that we've all seen or heard about or maybe experienced. And then there's the other end where it's a much more subtle way of power over. But primarily, who is in charge. With power with, it's a shared power. That every person's voice is heard and valued, and that it's more of a consensus driven. Now, some people might say, oh, well, that takes too much time. We have to make decisions. It's not that every single decision is made that way, but certain decisions are, that you have a structure for making decisions that includes people, and not in name only, because if it's just going to be some puff thing, people can see through that. But what that consensus allows, whatever time that you invest up front, what's great about it is you don't have to deal with after you've made a decision and then forcing it down people's throat, getting people to buy in. That's all energy and time.
Right.
People don't think about that.
Right,
that
right.
takes a lot of energy and
then
effort.
they don't really execute the commands quite
right.
right, because it's not the army, and they're not going to be shot.
Yeah, or they do it part way, or they don't fully understand, or there's not shared meaning. When you have a consensus, there's a shared meaning. People understand what the words mean and why we said them that way. And too often, I believe in companies and other organizations, is that we throw words around: leadership, customer service, teamwork, as if we all have the same definition. That, if I say team, it means the same thing to you that it does to me. Well, that's not true. But we don't spend much time distinguishing that and figuring out, well, what's a great experience of team that you've had? Or, what does it mean to me to be part of a team? And what can I bring?
Right.
We don't have those conversations. I mean, the companies I work with do, but by and large, that's not what we're talking about. We're trying to save time and, get to the point, but then that lack of understanding causes a delay, and you end up having to put the time in anyway. So why not be proactive and put it in at the front, and then you save yourself all that effort and angst afterwards.
You used the word conversations just now, and that's a big word here because it's part of your company name, but it also appears in this book quite a bit.
Yeah, she talks about vital conversations, which is a little bit different than transformational conversations.
But it has to do with openness and communication, and
yes.
Let's go into that a little bit, because it is a functional thing that people can do, as opposed to understanding that they need to be doing the general principles.
One of the things so there's two different things. One is, as far as transformational conversations occur, why I called my company that is because I believe that any change has to begin with a conversation. There is nothing that can happen without first a conversation, whether it's with yourself or with somebody else. The other part of it for me is that how we've been trained to be in conversations, for most of us, I say, is very limiting. Before we speak, we often are thinking, what are you going to say? Or I'm trying to prepare for the next line. We're not, as a rule, just inquiring, just asking a question and then being present for whatever you say, and then trusting that I'm going to have something to say after that. And it's not this free flow of ideas, especially in business. Often people are trying to protect themselves in some way, or present themselves with a certain facade. And I don't mean that in a negative, manipulative way. It's just kind of the way we've been trained to be in business.
It's hard to avoid that.
Yeah, you don't let your hair down, with your employees. You got to maintain that way of looking good and all of that.
The official person.
I'm sorry?
The official person.
Exactly. And so we're very constrained in conversation. So with transformational conversations, what I talk about is how do you be present in a conversation and actually allow it to emerge versus trying to control it, trying to, even with the best of intentions, trying to manipulate it. And I think with Judith's book, what she's talking about with vital conversations these are the conversations we really need to have with people. Conversations that change people's lives because they're not operating on this sort of superficial level. They're operating on a deeper level, and you're
getting to the real problems.
Well, you're also getting to the successes. You're getting to the elements that allow for people to operate at their best. And there are different kinds of vital conversations, but they're vital because if organizations aren't having them, then the organization is going to fail or be an unhealthy organization for people to participate in. And that's why she calls them vital, I think, is to remind us that these aren't fluff, foo-foo conversations. These are conversations that make a difference. And again, you can't, it's hard to ask somebody to have a vital conversation in an environment that hasn't changed. It's like taking one kind of fish out of an aquarium and putting them in another aquarium and expecting them to do well when you haven't created an environment for that fish to do well. So that's the thing, is you have to start somewhere, but you have to start with, I think, with conversations that are safer. And then you have to let the person you're conversing with see that you're trustworthy, that you're not going to then go use this information in some way against them, or you're going to do something positive with that information.
So you can start small.
Absolutely.
Which fits another, I guess, how many words would it be? 3. Fanning the flame. They use that because when you're trying to make a fire, you rub a couple sticks together. Of course, if you have a match or a lighter, it's a little easier. But you still start with something small, and oxygen is needed. And so, if it's a little difficult to get started, more oxygen is helpful.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that people don't understand is that you can't just try something and then it didn't work that first time and go, oh, see, nothing works. Or it didn't work. Maybe it didn't work that particular time, but that doesn't, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You keep looking for a way to get it in, to have those conversations.
You need a little faith that it's going to lead to something. And I guess if you start with something small and simple and you see some success there, that's a good way to do that.
Yeah, I tell people with the work that I do using appreciative inquiry is you could start a meeting with a different question. That's a start. So instead of saying, all right, everybody give their report, you could start with everybody share the best thing that happened this week or a high point experience that you had this week. Just that little shift has people know that during the week, I have to start looking for high points. What's a high point this week? It changes their focus from just reporting out the problems to actually focusing on, I had like 4 or 5 good things happen this week. So even if they don't get to share all 4 of them at the meeting, they have 4 good things that happened this week, and that changes their perspective. So it's amazing the small things can make a big difference. Whenever I wonder whether one person can make a difference, I always think of Rosa Parks. For me, she's my heroine because she didn't get up off a bus one day, or didn't stand up, I should say, for someone, and it changed the world. And every person.
Talk about fanning the flame.
Yeah, everybody can make a difference. If you choose not to gossip, if you hear gossip and somebody's trying to gossip with you and you choose not to participate in that, that can make a difference.
Now, do you think, though, that you could take an organization necessarily, of course, there's no such thing as a general average organization, there are only real ones. But sometimes do people just have to leave the organization to find something more positive, or is it possible to change an organization? Is it worth trying even for an employee?
It's really difficult to say. I mean, that's not a decision that I could say blanketly yes or no. I think it depends. If the organization has lots of things that are in line with your vision, in line with what you believe, and you have the energy for it, yes, I think that one person can change an entire organization.
And maybe then if you looked at the positive in the organization, you would say, it is pretty good, now let's make it better.
Yeah, and we tend to focus on what doesn't work. That's the traditional problem-solving approach, which is the opposite of what I do. You know, I work with an organization. Yes, there are issues, I'm not denying that, but rather than trying to fix what they don't want to have happen, I help them to figure out what do they really want and how can they use their strengths, their talents, those things that work about them to get where they want to go.
And I guess that's where the concept of culture comes in, because one could complain or object to what you just said and said, well, if the roof is leaking, we can't be sitting around and not doing anything and talking about how nice the weather was last week. We need to fix that roof. How do you deal with that contradiction?
Well, because it's not that I would say, oh, forget the roof. I'd say, okay, the roof is leaking. What is it you truly want? Because if you just fix the hole in the roof, but what you want is a
new roof,
a new roof, or you want a new building, then focusing all your attention on fixing that stupid leak takes you away from having what you really want. So maybe all you want is a roof that doesn't leak. Well, then that's fine. Then you know exactly how to make that happen. But in organizations, they tend to keep their eye on what's not working and thinking that that's going to get them to what they want. But that's not. You know, anytime you focus on just fixing a problem, you're going to get that. But most of the time what then happens is new problems arise because you're not doing it from a systemic point of view, you're doing it from a, okay, we need to fix that thing. And often it's a false cause. You know, if we think, oh, it's that employee, you know, that particular person is, you know, toxic to this team, so we're going to take care of that. You remove that person, but you don't see what was it that caused that
And there's
toxicity.
always another one, right? It's the Hydra.
There's always, to me, that's the difficulty with the problem-solving approach, is that you focus on what's wrong and you miss so much.
That would be more like if there's a leak, cleaning up the spill on the floor.
That's right. And that's what most of the time I say organizations spend their time on, is you know, dealing with the water on the floor rather than
fixing the roof.
Fixing the roof, or even getting a new building, or whatever it is that they truly want. And
time flies so fast. However, we're a little flexible here, and I don't want us to go, even though it's probably been 30 minutes, without a little bit more. You said on your website, I saw that, appreciative inquiry. And I looked it up, and I found that there's actually some science behind it, and there are professors here and there who promote it and write articles about it. I think maybe if you could just talk just a little bit about it. That's also a tool that can be, and I know you have already mentioned some of the parts of it, but.
Well, appreciative inquiry was originally came from Dr. David Cooper-Ryder in the mid-'80s. He created appreciative inquiry out of his PhD dissertation. Oh. And I studied with him at Case Western University in Cleveland. And the creating we, they're actually two separate things, but appreciative inquiry is one way, you could say, of creating we. There are other ways of doing that as well. And that's how I am associated with Judith Glaser and the Creating We Institute. Is I use appreciative inquiry and like that. So anyway, appreciative inquiry is the study and exploration of what gives life to human systems when they function at their best. So said another way is we look at organizations as a mystery to reveal and to discover about, and that the answers for how this works at its best, this organization or business, is within the organization. There's a lot to learn there. The traditional approach is an organization is a problem to be solved, but a human system is a living, breathing system. It's not a, you know, oh, the handle broke off this cup, so let's glue it back on. Human beings aren't that way. We're very complex. So the appreciative inquiry approach is to discover what works and look to see how can you use that to get where you want to go. And
that's a little bit in marketing, we would say you look at your strengths and you build on your strengths.
It is. It's strengths focused, but it's also, I like to say, finding the conditions under which you work best, because strengths can be too defining. If I say my strength is I'm really good with people, it doesn't give you a whole lot, because does that mean I'm good with people in every situation? Under conflict, am I good?
Or is it one as a group?
Yeah, there's all kinds of nuances to that. So what I help with organizations and individuals that I work with is to discover what are the conditions under which they work best. If we take a plant and we put it in a soil that's not conducive to it growing and it dies, we don't blame the plant. We go, oh, not enough sun, whatever.
Right.
But with human beings, we don't do that. We say you should be able to operate at your best in any and all circumstances. It's crazy.
It is.
It's crazy, but that's how we think. The I-centric approach says that we're all should be good at a lot of things. You know, there's that whole, you have to be good at everything. That's crazy. Why would you, those aren't your talents.
Another image, I think, and I can't help but blurt it out, is that in looking at this book, you can see how it's great to have a lot of different kinds of people, and in the wrong kind of an organization, because everybody doesn't look alike, they're going to be criticized.
Yes.
And one organization in the book, they talked about everybody was wearing black because that's what was expected.
Yes.
And they even had some small other feature, I don't know, a ring or something that they all wore. Oh no, one they said "so" at the beginning of their sentences because the boss always did.
Yeah.
So everything looks alike, and yet the diversity of being yourself and exploiting your strengths. Yes, you look like some of the other parts because you're a little different, but your strengths then can shine.
That's right, and the complementary talents and strengths is critical. When you're building a team, you don't want everybody to have the same strengths. Using a baseball analogy, the strengths that a first baseman needs is not the same strengths that a pitcher needs. It's not the same strengths that a right fielder needs. So, but we don't think about teams that way. We try to get like people together and think we should divvy up the work a particular way. Well, that doesn't work under all circumstances. There may be situations where that's right, but not always. And so to be a little more creative in terms of even how you put teams together, and it's really thinking differently about why and how we do things. Going back to the example of the ham, if
Right.
you've always done it this way, why? Does it still serve the purpose? Is it still in line with what your vision is, what you really want, or are you just doing it because somewhere along the way you thought, oh, I should?
Right.
So, the benefits of creating we and all of these kinds of methodologies that allow human beings to operate at their best far, far exceed any downside that I have ever seen. Because, but it is scary for some people because there's this illusion of wanting control.
We all want control.
Control is an illusion. You can't control anything.
I like that.
There is nothing you can control. It's all an illusion. And so when you can let go of the reins and let it emerge, it's actually a lot less scary because the risk is distributed. You have a lot of people trying to get to where you want to go. It's not that burden of you have to do it yourself. You don't have to know everything. It's so freeing to let go of the reins and to allow the people who really know
how to do it.
How to do it, and also can look at different ways of thinking about it.
And share your problem as the book started out.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't have that burden of, carrying that rock uphill by yourself. So.
Well, I think this was very transforming for me. I enjoyed it a lot.
That's great. Thank you.
I'll probably ask you back again.
Well, I'd love to come back.
Great.
And the Creating We Institute has a website, thecreatingweinstitute.com.
I'll check it out.
So I highly recommend it. There's a free DNA assessment on there. So.
Sure, that means a little bit different than dinucleic acid.
That's right.
Okay,
it's a great tool. So.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed the show and that you tune in next time. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.